months at sea. No women, no privacy. So how did sailors in the age of sail deal with the lack of sex? The rules said no. The ship said maybe. Shore leave blue pay on brothels. Long voyages bred hush-hush arrangements. Hammocks got shared. Friendships turned into something the logbook never wrote. Some captains cracked down. Others looked the other way, as long as the guns were clean and the watch was kept. Court-martial files whisper one story. Sailors' songs and jokes hint at another. Was it loneliness, love, or just survival in a wooden world with nowhere to go? We'll lift the hatch and follow the clues. No spoilers, just the truth. The sea tried to keep quiet. Tell me the exact time you're watching. Dawn watch or midnight tide. If this pulled you in, tap like so, the next chapter sails a little farther. You think loneliness is bad now? Try being trapped on a floating plank of wood with 200 unwashed men. No privacy, no plumbing, and the nearest woman roughly 3,000 nautical miles away. That's the age of sail for you, centuries of ocean salt and suppressed desire. You can almost smell it. Pitch brine tar, sweat, and a faint background note of despair. The ship isn't just transportation. It's a world unto itself, floating between monotony and madness. You wake each morning to the creak of ropes, the slap of waves, and the knowledge that you'll see the same faces for months, sometimes years. And not one of those faces is the kind you might dream about. People imagine the romance of sailing, the adventure, the sunsets, the heroism. But the reality is closer to a mobile prison with nicer views. Wooden decks above rats below hammocks, swinging inches apart, and a routine so repetitive it could dull the sharpest mind. The ship becomes an ecosystem of smell, sounds, and frustrations, half monastery, half madhouse. Desire doesn't vanish just because the ocean stretches endlessly. It lingers, prowling below the ribs, like a tide waiting to rise. Sailors had to manage it somehow. Some through humor, some through superstition, and some by simply exhausting themselves until nothing but sleep remained. You work 18-hour shifts, your hands blistered, your muscles screaming, and by the time you crawl into your hammock, the body's rebellion has quieted into fatigue. Exhaustion is its own kind of chastity. Still, the jokes never stopped. Sailors were experts at gallows humor. They'd carve obscene faces on barrels, sing bawdy songs about ports they barely remembered, and trade impossible fantasies like currency. The more ridiculous the story, the better, because exaggeration was one of the few luxuries aboard. You can't afford melancholy on a ship. Laughter keeps mutiny at bay. Food didn't help the mood either. Salt beef hard enough to chip teeth, maggoty biscuits, and swill that passed for soup. Men joked that their rations were so tough they'd outlast temptation. The ocean took their sense of taste first, then their patience. And if you think a modern office without coffee is bad, imagine an entire deck of caffeine-deprived sailors sharing one bucket for washing, shaving, and occasionally spiritual despair. There were tiny escapes, of course. Letters from home, if you were lucky. A token, perhaps a locket, a ribbon, or a scrap of fabric that smelled faintly of land. You'd tuck it away, inhaling it during night watch when the sea turned black and endless. That small reminder of humanity could keep a man sane or break him entirely. The officers liked to believe discipline solved everything. They thought if the crew was kept busy mending sails, cleaning decks, drilling endlessly, no one would have the energy for trouble. They were half right. Work dulled emotion, but didn't erase it. Every sailor learned to store his longing, like rum in a sealed cask, tight, hidden, potent. And everyone knew that one wrong word, one taunt too many could crack that cask wide open. You might wonder, did sailors ever talk about it openly? Rarely. Masculinity aboard ship was as rigid as the mast. Weakness, even emotional, drew mockery. Instead, men translated loneliness into ritual whittling, small figurines writing crude verses or scratching graffiti on bulkheads. Some carved hearts into the wood initials, linked by rope motifs. Nobody commented, but everyone understood. Superstition filled the gaps logic couldn't. Some sailors believed the sea punished desire, that if you longed too much for a woman on land, the ocean would grow jealous and drown you. Others whispered that mermaids were real, not beautiful, but eerie pale and vengeful. Those tales worked as moral warnings and stress relief at once. It's easier to laugh about seduction by mythical fish than admit to sleeplessness and frustration. And then there were dreams. Sailors talked about shore dreams, vivid fantasies that hit after months at sea. They'd wake sweating hearts racing, swearing they'd just smelled perfume or heard a laugh that wasn't real. Some said these dreams were a kind of salt madness. Others called them mercy. The truth is, deprivation became part of identity. To endure the voyage was to prove control over hunger, over fear, over the most basic instincts. You weren't just sailing against the sea, you were sailing against yourself. Every day was a negotiation between body and discipline, between what was human and what was required. In the journals of the time, officers wrote about storms, mutinies, exotic ports, but rarely about loneliness. That silence perhaps says more than any entry could. Because the hardest storms weren't on the horizon, they were under the skin. The creak of the hull becomes a kind of heartbeat, one you can't escape. You know the rhythm so well, it feels like it's echoing inside your skull. That's when it hits you. This ship isn't a vessel. It's a cell, a floating prison dressed in sails and duty. From the main deck to the galley, privacy simply doesn't exist. Hammocks hang shoulder-to-shoulder, bodies sway like pendulums, and even your dreams feel crowded. You live among smells that never leave damp wood, rope, tar, and the collective humanity of too many men packed too tight. There's nowhere to hide, not from the sea, not from the captain, and not from yourself. Rank determines everything. You sleep where you belong on the hierarchy, eat what your position earns you, and speak only when allowed. A captain might enjoy a cabin the size of a pantry, while the rest cram into a space where you can't sit up without hitting the beams. Every rope has a place, every man a purpose. The ship runs on precision and obedience, because one misstep at sea can sink hundreds. That discipline bleeds into the soul, turning even thoughts into regulated movements. Now imagine living in that order while carrying a body full of rebellion. Every natural impulse is treated like mutiny waiting to happen. Officers preached control, calling it naval virtue. The body was a tool, not a territory of pleasure. If you couldn't master yourself, how could you master a sail in a storm? Self-denial became part of the uniform. Punishment enforced the illusion. A sailor caught stealing rum or fighting could expect flogging bareback and the lash cutting through salt, sticky skin. It wasn't just about pain. It was theater. The whole crew watched, learning that shame was more terrifying than agony. There was no punishment, however, for loneliness. That one you had to manage alone. The ship's rhythm made it worse. Bells marked the hours, dividing days into watches. 4 hours on duty, 4 off. Time itself became mechanical, predictable, relentless. The boredom between storms gnawed at the mind. Men cleaned the same planks, polished the same brass, told the same jokes until words lost meaning. Desire squeezed into this monotony, curdled into something else. frustration maybe, or melancholy. You start to understand why sailors invented elaborate rituals. They whistled only when allowed. Whistling could call the wind and risk angering the sea. They held mock trials for rats. They carved miniature ships or dice to pass time. It wasn't mindless superstition. It was a desperate attempt to stay human. When all softness was banned, humor became rebellion. And then there was the unspoken tension. Everyone knew it, but no one said it aloud. When you live shoulder to shoulder for months, every glance, every brush of the hand takes on weight. Friendship becomes survival until it crosses invisible lines. The British Navy called any improper intimacy between men a capital crime punishable by hanging. Yet they never managed to stamp it out completely. You can't police loneliness with rope and ink. The irony officers pretended not to notice what they couldn't control. The ship's log might record conduct unbecoming gross indecency or simply nothing at all. Some captains punished harshly to set examples. Others quietly reassigned hammocks to diffuse scandal. The code of silence was another form of order. In that silence, bonds formed anyway. You can picture two sailors on night watch, whispering stories to keep awake home family dreams of dry land. The tone softens, laughter fades, and for a few moments they forget the world's rules. Nothing happens, and yet everything happens. Affection in the age of sail was often invisible, but felt like thunder beneath the deck. The environment itself shaped this tension. The sound of waves in the dark, the confinement, the trust you had to place in your crewmates. All of it built intimacy faster than words could manage. Sailors depended on each other for survival, pulling ropes and masts in perfect sync. That physical coordination blurred lines between labor and connection. You might never speak your thoughts, but your hands already know the weight of another man's. Even the sea seemed complicit. Its endless motion reminded you of what you couldn't have mocking and mesmerizing at once. Some sailors swore the ocean whispered at night, calling names, promising warmth that wasn't real. Others said the ocean cured them of desire altogether. Cold water kills fire. You learn to bury need beneath routine. Scrub the deck polish, the brass check the rigging. Sleep. Repeat. You turn discipline into anesthesia. By the 10th week, even your imagination gets tired. The faces of women blur, replaced by the horizon's blankness. If that sounds bleak, it was, but survival demanded it. The age of sail trained its men to convert longing into labor, to let the ship swallow emotion as it did everything else. Maybe that's why sailors sang so much, because words set to rhythm could express what daily life forbade. And if a song drifted below deck that sounded suspiciously tender, no one asked who it was about. When exhaustion and hierarchy weren't enough to quiet the body, sailors turned to the one cure the Navy couldn't ration: rum. If loneliness was the ship's slow disease, alcohol was its medicine anesthetic, and occasional mutiny all in one barrel. You can picture it, a sweating cask rolled across the deck, the daily ration ladled into pewter cups, the line of weary men waiting like parishioners for communion. The tot of rum wasn't luxury, it was survival. It dulled pain, masked fear, and for a few hours dissolved the unbearable awareness of distance. When your world was measured in ropes and orders, that cup was the only democracy afloat. Rum blurred more than minds. It blurred boundaries. After a few rounds, jokes grew bolder, songs louder, inhibitions thinner. Officers tolerated it drunken cheer, kept boredom from curdling into mutiny. But too much rum, and something else happened. Tongues loosened, tempers flared, and the line between comradeship and something more intimate occasionally vanished in the dark. The ship's surgeon, forever busy with bruises and infections, saw the consequences of both excess and repression. In the surgeon's chest lay the true secrets of life at sea: bandages, saws, and a tin of mercury pills, nicknamed Blue Mass. They were supposed to treat venereal disease, but mostly they treated nothing and made everything worse. Mercury poisoning was slow, cruel, and common. The symptoms, tremors, insanity, and rotting gums, were as familiar to sailors as seasickness. You might wonder, how did they get those diseases if they were months at sea without women? Simple ports. Every time a ship reached Havana, Manila, or Portsmouth, a wave of sailors flooded the taverns and brothels like released prisoners. The brief frenzy of freedom became ritual drink, gamble, seek affection, and return to the ship with a limp and a conscience that burned only as long as the mercury lasted. Rum also inspired superstition. Sailors swore that mixing alcohol with salt water before a voyage tamed the blood. Others believed spilling rum before leaving port pleased the sea spirits' payment in advance for calm winds. The rituals gave them a sense of control over bodies they couldn't trust and a world that offered no privacy. When the barrels ran dry, desperation brewed alternatives. Some mixed sugar vinegar and fermented fruit peel to create Kill Devil. Others risked blindness drinking industrial spirits stolen from lamps. The Navy called it indiscipline. Sailors called it chemistry. If you ever wonder how creative humans can be when deprived, look to a man with too much time and too little rum. Yet rum was also the glue that held the hierarchy together. Officers drank differently, port brandy, perhaps sherry, but they too needed the nightly dose of numbness. The captain's decanter was never empty, even when rations ran low. Sailors noticed, of course, and joked about holy spirits trickling down from heaven. On bad days, humor was the only rebellion available. There were myths too, stories traded in whispers about how abstaining too long could drive a man insane, how sea fever could twist dreams into hallucinations. The older hands called it the itch of Neptune, a madness that made sailors talk to their hammocks at night or stare too long into the dark water. It wasn't lust so much as the brain's revolt against isolation. The ship's surgeon might dose them with laudanum or bleed them a medical cure for a spiritual sickness. Still, not every coping mechanism involved self-destruction. Music worked miracles. A sailor might carve a flute from scrap wood, hum an old folk song, or hammer rhythm on barrels. The sea had its own tempo. They just added melody. Some tunes were bawdy, others heartbreakingly gentle. When sung in chorus, they became a kind of group therapy. Leave her. Johnny wasn't just about ships. It was about letting go of desire itself. Letters home helped too, though few ever arrived. You might find a sailor hunched by lantern light, scratching words onto damp paper, ink smudged by waves. My dearest, the letter begins, but the rest is a mix of memory and wishful thinking. Some wrote to wives, others to women they imagined, others still to names they borrowed from songs. Writing made the heart tangible again, even if the recipient never existed. The most dangerous nights came when the rum ran out and the silence settled in. That's when stories turned darker about curses. Storms born from sailors' sins, ghost ships manned by those who sought comfort in forbidden ways. The Navy was built on such legends. Fear was discipline's best accomplice. Yet even fear couldn't erase the simple truth: men are human, and humans need connection. It's easy to mock those rituals now from the safety of dry land and indoor plumbing. But when the wind shrieks like a living thing and the deck pitches under your feet, you begin to understand. Every sip of rum, every whispered joke, every song and superstition, they weren't decadence. They were survival distilled. So when dawn came and the deckhands scrubbed the stains from the previous night's revelry, They weren't just cleaning the ship, they were erasing evidence that the sea had won, if only for a moment. Below deck, the air thickens with salt sweat and something unspoken, because when men live long enough without touch, even silence starts to feel dangerous. You descend the narrow ladder into the lower deck, ducking under beams polished by years of backs and hands. The light here is candle thin, filtered through planks that groan like lungs. Hammocks sway inches apart, brushing now and then in rhythm with the ship's roll. Nobody talks about it, but everyone feels it, the closeness, the constant reminder that there's no such thing as alone at sea. The Navy called this part of the ship the mess deck. But the name fits in more ways than one. It's where men ate, slept, joked, argued, and tried to forget what was missing. Here, you weren't just fighting storms, you were fighting nature itself. The longer the voyage, the quieter the laughter, the heavier the glances. Historians like to sanitize this part of the story. They talk about courage, duty, adventure. They don't mention the restless energy that builds after months without warmth. But the sailors knew. They'd joke in half-truths, calling themselves brothers of the brine. They'd sing songs full of double meanings where tying knots didn't always mean rope work. Was there affection? Yes. Was it spoken? Almost never. The age of sail was built on hierarchy, and fear and love of any kind that didn't serve command was treated like contraband. The articles of war carved in cold legal prose condemned unnatural acts to death. Yet human nature has never cared much for paperwork. Accounts survive, even if buried in euphemism. Officers wrote of improper camaraderie, unnamed offenses, and strange attachments. But if you read between the lines, you find something tender. Two sailors charged for laying together. After hours, one refusing to testify against the other, both flogged into silence. Their names erased their story, repeated 100 times in 100 ports. Still, not every bond was forbidden. Friendship itself could be shockingly intimate by modern standards. Men slept tangled in hammocks to stay warm, shared blankets, massaged each other's aching backs after long watches. They shaved one another's heads, washed wounds, mended clothes. Touch was survival, not sin. The line between affection and necessity blurred like the horizon in fog. There were nicknames too: sweethearts, mates, cousins. It sounds playful, but each word carried layers. A sailor might joke, "He's my sea wife," and the crew would laugh, but no one pressed further. The joke was armor, a way to speak truth while pretending it was fiction. That's the paradox of life below deck. The stricter the rules, the smarter the disguises. Not every ship treated it the same. Some captains were tyrants, sniffing out any hint of scandal to enforce order. Others quietly ignored it, reasoning that as long as the crew obeyed, what happened in hammocks wasn't their concern. Pragmatism often trumped morality. After all, a ship needed cooperation more than purity. The isolation bred its own kind of tenderness. You can imagine two men patching sails under moonlight, trading stories of women left behind, of letters never answered. The talk slows, the laughter fades, and in that hush, something passes between them, a flicker of understanding that defies vocabulary. It wasn't always romance. Sometimes it was just recognition. You see me. I exist beyond the uniform. Ironically, the very same environment that punished emotion also made it inevitable. Constant danger forged fierce loyalty. Saving a man's life in a storm created bonds stronger than vows. Many diaries describe grief when a crewmate died not as brotherly duty, but as heartbreak disguised as stoicism. He was a fine sailor, they'd write when they meant, "I can't believe he's gone." One of the few who hinted at it openly was Herman Melville, who had himself served on whaling ships. His novels whispered what sailors already knew, that the sea stripped away society's illusions, leaving only raw humanity. In Billy Budd, friendship becomes devotion. In Moby Dick, comradeship verges on worship. Readers called it poetic exaggeration. Sailors called it Tuesday. There were rituals for managing loss, too. When a crewmate died, the body was sewn into canvas with a cannonball at the feet, the last stitch through the nose to ensure he was truly gone. The ceremony was short. No priest, just the captain, reading from a soaked Bible and the splash of the body sinking. Men returned to work immediately after. Yet that night, someone always placed an extra ration of rum beside an empty hammock. No words, no explanation, just a gesture quiet and sacred. You realize now that brotherhood at sea was less about equality and more about empathy under pressure. It wasn't soft. It was survival hardened by salt. The world above deck saw sailors as crude, rough, and lawless. But down here, beneath the planks, they built a small republic of the heart, silent, makeshift, endlessly human. The ocean has a way of stripping people bare. Titles, rank, rules, they all dissolve in the sound of wind and water. And when every day might be your last companionship, becomes a kind of prayer. Maybe that's why so many men who returned to land later said they missed the sea. But what they really missed were the people who made it bearable. You hear it before you see it, a laugh high and bright, echoing through the rigging. The sound doesn't belong on a warship. Then you realize it's a woman's voice. Every now and then the ocean broke its own rules, and a woman stepped aboard disguised as a man, proving that temptation sometimes wore a beard and borrowed breeches. It sounds like myth, but it wasn't. From Anne Bonny and Mary Reid in the pirate world to Hannah Snell and Mary Lacey in the Navy, women did sail hidden beneath coarse shirts, hair cropped, voices lowered, hearts hammering. Some came chasing lovers, some running from them, others simply refusing the quiet life on land. Their presence turned the ship into something stranger, more fragile, more human. You imagine the chaos of discovery, months of routine shattered because one sailor fainted at the sight of blood. And the surgeon, ever the detective, noticed a secret none had guessed. The revelation could spark scandal or protectiveness, outrage or awe. Sometimes she was put ashore. Sometimes, if she'd proven her worth, the captain turned a blind eye. Skill bought tolerance. The sea respected competence more than gender. Hannah Snell became a legend. Serving aboard the HMS Swallow in the 1740s, she fought in battles, endured floggings, and even tended her own wounds in secret. When she finally revealed her identity, she became a celebrity paraded through London in full uniform. Crowds didn't know whether to cheer or blush. The Navy predictably rewrote her story into patriotism and left the rest out. On smaller merchant ships, women sometimes joined openly as cooks, laundresses, or wives of warrant officers. Officially, they weren't sailors. Unofficially, they patched sails, swabbed decks, and steadied nerves during storms. Their presence reminded men of the world they'd left behind, and that reminder cut both ways. Some sailors became protective, others restless, a few dangerously possessive. One woman could disrupt an entire crew's rhythm, not because of what she did, but because she embodied everything forbidden. There's a journal from a Dutch East India voyage that tells of a young lad who was discovered to be female halfway to Batavia. The captain convened a hearing, but instead of outrage, the sailors applauded her courage. She worked as hard as any, the log reads. Let her work still. They did, and she finished the voyage quietly, competently vanishing from history at the next port. It's easy to romanticize these stories, but behind them lies exhaustion, fear, and constant vigilance. Imagine sleeping each night in a hammock surrounded by men praying the next wave of turbulence doesn't undo your disguise. Still, the sea had its own sense of irony. The same navy that forbade women aboard also relied on them as shore wives who followed regiments from port to port, washing clothes, nursing the wounded, selling food. Some ships carried unofficial passengers anyway. The captain's mistress, the purser's niece, or a woman who'd bribed her way aboard with promises of discretion. Everyone pretended not to notice. The ship's log might simply record a passenger of delicate disposition. And then, of course, came the wives of the fleet women who met the men where the land began. Port towns like Portsmouth, Kingston, and Manila thrived on what sailors spent after months of deprivation. The entire local economy ran on short-term passion. Women in these ports were both livelihood and lifeline, though the balance of power was rarely fair. Some sailors fell in love, others fell sick, most fell broke. But for a few nights, the world felt wide again. What fascinates historians isn't the scandal. It's the tenderness buried inside it. A letter found in an officer's trunk reads, "She laughed when I asked her to wait, said she'd already waited for too many ghosts." That's the truth of the age of sail. Every affair was a farewell rehearsed in advance. The presence of women aboard didn't just alter morale, it challenged authority. Some captains saw it as weakness, others as proof that the sea's rules could be bent by courage. In one case, a disguised sailor reportedly saved her ship during a storm, patching a torn sail while the men froze. Only after the voyage did they discover she wasn't who they thought. Her crewmates toasted her anyway. You can almost feel the paradox. Ships designed to enforce order depended on chaos for their stories. A single woman aboard became rumor, legend, and cautionary tale all at once. For the men, she was both symbol and mirror, reminding them of everything they'd repressed. For herself, she was proof that adventure didn't belong to any one gender. So when the night is calm and the ship rolls softly, you can imagine her, the disguised sailor, leaning against the gunwale wind, pulling at her hair where the cap slipped just a bit. Somewhere deep in the hold, her secret breathes with the rhythm of the waves. The men nearby never suspect a thing. Or maybe they do, and just choose silence. After all, every sailor knows some truths are safer at sea. You feel the ship lurch as anchor drops, and the smell of land drifts aboard smoke, spice, mud, humanity, after months of living like monks. In a wooden coffin, sailors didn't just disembark at port, they exploded into it. Every harbor in the age of sail was a pressure valve. Havana, Manila, Portsmouth, Kingston, Batavia. All of them knew the ritual. The moment pay was issued, men rushed ashore like tidewater breaking through a dam. Streets filled with shouting, laughing, singing, and sometimes fighting. Local taverns doubled prices. Local priests doubled prayers. The sailors called it liberty, though it was closer to chaos with a schedule. The first stop was rarely food. It was rum. Thirst came before hunger, and the first drink tasted like resurrection. After that, it was gambling, storytelling, and the kind of boasting that only flourishes when consequences are distant. Port towns adapted accordingly. Entire districts sprang up to serve transient passion. The British Navy called them sailor towns places, where every other building was a tavern, a brothel, or a boarding house, pretending not to be both. To the sailors, these nights ashore were the only time life made sense again. The rules of the sea, obedience, silence, restraint dissolved in the noise of drums and fiddles. For a few hours, men who answered to whistles and cannon orders could make choices however reckless. They bought trinkets, tattoos, sometimes promises of love. Some fell in genuine affection, others simply in gratitude for a soft voice that wasn't shouting orders. The economics were brutal but predictable. Women in port towns lived by the same tides as sailors prosperous when ships docked destitute when the harbor emptied. Many were widows of sailors lost to storms, now serving the same system that had taken their husbands. Others were enslaved or indentured, forced into trade by poverty or colonial exploitation. Every encounter carried shadows of power and survival. It wasn't romance, but it wasn't always cruelty either. Just two kinds of loneliness meeting in the dark. Navies tried to regulate it. The British Admiralty issued endless proclamations, warning crews to avoid lewd women and the contagion of vice. Yet even they knew the futility. Ships carried surgeons for a reason, and the French disease syphilis was as common as splinters. Treatments ranged from mercury rubs to burning alcohol baths, each as unpleasant as the infection itself. Sailors joked that the real punishment for sin was the doctor's cure. Still, human memory is selective. Ask any old tar about his youth, and he'll grin, skip the details, and call it shore leave. The laughter hides a truth everyone knew. Those brief nights of pleasure often came at a lifetime's cost. Some never made it back on board, robbed, drunk, or press-ganged into another crew before dawn. Sailor towns swallowed men whole, then forgot their names. Yet even in the roughest ports, there were softer stories. A sailor might rent a small room above a tavern and share it for a week or two with a woman who braided his hair, mended his uniform, and listened to his dreams of home. He'd call her my wife of Kingston or my Manila girl, though everyone knew those vows expired with the tide. Still, in letters home, many mentioned them fondly, not as shame but as proof they'd been human somewhere between storms. There were darker corners, two floating brothels, moored just outside the harbor, unreachable by the law. Old frigates stripped of cannon and rigging became hulks of pleasure where privacy could be bought by the hour. One French sailor called them ships of land that smelled like the sea forgot them. Disease spread faster than rumor. Sailors returned aboard limping and quieter than before. Some ports institutionalized it. In Batavia, colonial authorities taxed prostitution reasoning. It was cheaper than constant outbreaks of unrest. In Havana, women who serviced foreign ships were required to carry health certificates. Bureaucracy applied to intimacy. The system pretended to manage vice while quietly depending on it. For the rare few, shore leave turned into something lasting. A sailor might desert altogether, marrying into the local community planting gardens instead of masts. The Navy called it desertion. The locals called it staying sane. Across the Pacific, descendants of such unions still live families whose great-grandfathers simply decided one day not to go back to sea. But for most, morning came too soon. The drums beat recall, and half the crew staggered down the pier with empty pockets and full hearts or full regrets. Some sang on their way back. Others just stared at the horizon, already shrinking behind them. The ocean, as always, waited without judgment. What makes it tragic and beautiful is that every sailor knew the cycle. Desire wasn't a failure of discipline, it was proof of life. Shore leave was less indulgence than defiance, a way to say, I'm still human, before returning to the endless blue. And when the anchor rose, the ship's bell chimed, and the coastline faded. Every man aboard carried two kinds of ache, the one in his body, and the one that came from leaving behind the only tenderness he'd touched in months. If the sea punished storms, the Navy punished feelings. The great irony of the age of sail was that a system built on loyalty treated intimacy as its most dangerous crime. By the 18th century, Europe's navies had decided that the enemy within wasn't mutiny or disease, it was desire. The British Admiralty codified it clearly: any sodomy or unnatural act was punishable by death. The Articles of War didn't mince words. The phrase "shall suffer death" appeared as casually as "shall scrub the deck." Yet for all its severity, enforcement was messy, selective, and deeply hypocritical. Sailors were caught between impossible laws and human need. The same officers who demanded obedience also demanded silence. Rumors of indecency could end a career, but everyone knew what happened in the dark corners of hammocks and storerooms. The system thrived on pretending ignorance. As long as the ship ran smoothly, captains looked the other way. Trouble only came when someone talked or when gossip floated up the chain of command. Public trials were theater. The Navy wanted morality on display. Witnesses were dragged before courts-martial made to describe unnatural practices in language so vague it turned farce. Most sailors wept not from guilt, but from humiliation. Executions were rare, but floggings were common, sometimes 200 lashes enough to scar a man for life. It was terror disguised as purity. The hypocrisy ran deep. Officers who condemned their men were often rumored to have favorites themselves. Young cabin boys promoted suspiciously fast letters passed in private. The Navy was a hierarchy of secrecy where power shielded the very vices it claimed to destroy. Chaplains preached restraint from the quarterdeck, while captains courted mistresses in foreign ports. And below-deck men learned to speak affection in code. Language became camouflage. Words like mate and brother carried double meanings. A carved wooden heart exchanged between friends might be shrugged off as craftwork. Even the phrase "sleeping double" could hide 100 possibilities. The men weren't fools. They knew what the rules forbade, and they built entire subcultures inside the cracks. You can sense the tension in ship logs. One midshipman writes of being greatly attached to his bunkmate, another of feeling a peculiar fondness for a superior officer. Those words, innocent on paper, carried a quiet rebellion. The ship, that strict machine of empire, became also a laboratory for forbidden tenderness. Sometimes the fear turned violent. Sailors accused of impropriety were ostracized, beaten, or thrown overboard by accident. Others disappeared quietly at the next port, deserting to avoid disgrace. But the stories that survived tell of endurance as much as cruelty. One court record mentions a bosun refusing to name his companion under questioning. "He was my friend," he said. That single line echoes across centuries. It's worth remembering that naval life demanded emotional intimacy even as it forbade it. You couldn't survive storms or battle without trusting the man beside you. You tied your safety literally to his hands. That dependency created bonds that blurred any moral line drawn by land-bound lawmakers. Perhaps that's why punishment never fully worked. The Navy could control bodies, but it couldn't rewrite biology. There were pragmatic moments, too. During long voyages, some captains quietly admitted that content men are efficient men. They overlooked what they couldn't prove. One officer joked in his diary, "Better 2 happy sailors than 1 hanged and 1 haunted." You won't find that in naval textbooks, but it's as real as the sea itself. The contradictions rippled outward. Ashore pamphleteers warned that the Navy was a breeding ground of vice. But without it, their empires would have starved. Moral panic became part of the system. Condemn what you need control, what you can't stop. Every time a scandal surfaced, Parliament thundered about corruption of virtue, only to quietly fund another fleet. For the sailors, it wasn't ideology, it was survival. They formed friendships, stronger than family, used humor to deflect suspicion, and built loyalty through shared danger. When storms hit, morality vanished beneath necessity. A man pulling another from the sea, didn't care about law, only grip. When cannons roared and decks turned slick with blood, nobody asked what kind of love held the line. If you listen closely, the sea itself seems to mock human hypocrisy. It devours bodies without judgment, preserves secrets in salt. For every trial recorded in the Admiralty's ledgers, there are 100 unspoken stories buried under waves. The ocean remembers what the Empire tried to forget. And as the years rolled on, ships grew larger, discipline harsher, but desire still found its tiny corners among laughter, shared blankets, and the long silence of the night watch. The Navy called it moral decay. The men called it getting through another voyage. So next time you picture the glory of Nelson's fleet or the heroism of explorers crossing the unknown, remember the cost. The uniforms were pressed. The emotions weren't. Beneath every polished cannon and fluttering flag was a ship full of men quietly wrestling with the most ancient rebellion of all, the refusal to stop being human. The morning bell clangs, sharp and metallic, snapping you back to the rhythm of duty. No sermon on land could match the hypocrisy at sea, where chaplains preached chastity above deck, while captains kept secrets behind locked cabin doors. Every ship of the line carried a priest or chaplain, meant to keep the crew's souls as clean as their muskets. He read scripture every Sunday, conducted funerals over the rail, and scolded the men about temptations of the flesh. But sailors, already experts in irony, knew better. Half of them snored through the sermons, the other half whispered jokes about how the parson's Bible always fell open to the Song of Solomon. The chaplain's job wasn't easy. He stood between human nature and naval discipline, two tides forever at war. He'd preach purity to men who hadn't seen a woman in a year, then bless the rum ration after sunset. He was supposed to inspire virtue, but he also lived aboard the same cramped ship, heard the same curses, smelled the same sweat, fought the same storms. By the third month, even the most pious began muttering that God would forgive a man anything done below deck, since the devil already lived there. Meanwhile, higher up the chain of command, morality bent like a mast in gale. Captains were rarely saints. Many kept mistresses ashore or cabin boys, aboard young assistants who polished more than brass. Officers' quarters, though small, had doors and locks. Privacy, the one thing denied to the crew, bought indulgence for those with rank. Official reports ignored it, of course. Scandal was bad for the Empire's image. One famous case involved Captain Edward Raoult, called the gallant captain in newspapers. His journals, discovered years later, hinted delicately at companions of unusual devotion. Historians still debate what that meant, but sailors at the time didn't. Gossip moved faster than wind, and everyone knew the unspoken rule power could sin without consequence. That hypocrisy filtered downward. A sailor caught for indecency faced flogging. An officer with a mistress got promoted. It was empire in miniature discipline for the lower decks, discretion for the upper. The chaplain's Sunday homilies about purity of spirit sounded hollow when the men cleaning the captain's cabin found ribbons or perfume bottles tucked under charts. Yet, not every priest played the hypocrite. Some quietly helped. A few chaplains, perhaps remembering their own youth, turned confessions into counsel rather than condemnation. They'd remind the men that forgiveness was as infinite as the sea. One anonymous chaplain wrote in his diary, "They are lonely, and God made them so. I cannot flog loneliness out of them." That kind of compassion was rare, but it existed small acts of mercy inside a brutal system. Punishments, however, remained public. Men were paraded before the crew, stripped to the waist, lashed for indecency, while the chaplain recited psalms as if sanctifying the whip. The message was clear. Morality wasn't about virtue, it was about control. The Navy feared chaos more than sin. It was easier to humiliate one man than admit the entire structure was built on contradiction. Shore leave exposed that contradiction further. Officers attended balls and dinner parties flirting with merchants' daughters, while sailors roamed the same streets hunted by constables. Morality, like rank, was measured by income. The very cities that hosted Sunday parades also ran brothels funded by the same fleets. Church bells and tavern bells rang from the same square. The contradiction seeped into language itself. Official reports called brothels houses of refreshment a euphemism that fooled no one. Captains wrote home about moral vigilance while sending their personal laundry out with extra coin for discretion. The chaplains preached eternal judgment, but most sailors cared only for tomorrow's weather. Even superstition became refuge. Men muttered that Poseidon judged only courage, not conduct. If the sea spares me, one sailor joked, it means I'm forgiven. The chaplain scowled. The crew laughed. Faith aboard ship was a tug of war between guilt and gallows humor. Still, religion wasn't entirely a farce. During storms, when waves slammed higher than masts and lightning turned the rigging into fire, even the most cynical sailor prayed. The chaplain's voice, rising above the wind, brought strange comfort. Fear makes believers of everyone. The same men who mocked his sermons in calm weather begged him to bless their hammocks when death felt close enough to smell. It's easy now to judge their contradictions, but life at sea didn't allow consistency. Morality was just another rope pulled, knotted, frayed, and patched as needed. The ocean demanded flexibility, and the soul followed suit. By the time the voyage ended, the chaplain's sermons had lost their edge, the captain's secrets had deepened, and the crew's laughter had become the only honest religion left aboard. Because when the sea takes everything, comfort, privacy, control, the only commandment that matters is endurance. So you watch the parson close his Bible and wipe salt from his spectacles, pretending the wind carries hymns instead of whispers. Above deck, the stars begin to appear, and somewhere between faith and fatigue, you realize the ship has always sailed between heaven and hypocrisy, and somehow that's what kept it afloat. The waves have turned slow and steady, now the kind of rhythm that feels almost like breathing. After all the shouting, the storms, and the sermons, what keeps a sailor human is often the smallest thing. A splinter of wood shaped like a heart, a scrap of ribbon that still smells faintly of land. You see it everywhere once you know to look. Men carving keepsakes during quiet watches, their knives scraping rhythmically as they shape bits of driftwood into tiny boxes or pendants. A carved mermaid, a whale, a simple M for Mary or Margaret. These weren't just idle hands, they were memories made tangible. The sea took everything but these trinkets, gave something back. In trunks and sea chests, letters waited like ghosts. Folded, stained, sometimes unreadable from damp, they were read 100 times anyway. One sailor might whisper the words under his breath. Another would invent new ones, pretending the ink hadn't already faded away. For those who couldn't write, they'd ask a literate shipmate to pen their thoughts. Tell her, they'd say, that I still dream of her voice. Then perhaps after a moment's pause, make it sound brave. You can almost feel the ache behind that request. The letters weren't only about romance, they were a fight against invisibility. Out there in a world of orders and cannon fire, to be remembered by someone on land meant you still existed. The sea erased names faster than tombstones could carve them. Ink was defiance against that forgetting. Some sailors kept locks of hair tucked into wax-sealed pouches. Others wore small wooden rings carved from the ship's timbers, a way of saying, I belong somewhere, even if it's only to this. One French journal describes sailors passing around a tin medallion with the Virgin Mary etched on it. It wasn't religion, not really. It was protection, a reminder of something gentler than the sea's indifference. And sometimes those tokens weren't for women at all. They were for each other. Two sailors might swap carvings before a battle, or exchange rings for luck. Officially, they were charms against death. Unofficially, they were promises. On one recovered shipwreck off the coast of Cornwall, archaeologists found two simple wooden hearts tied together with twine. No names, no explanation. Just two hearts stubbornly bound. The loneliness bred a peculiar poetry. Sailors' songs, when not bawdy, could be heartbreakingly tender. Lowlands away. For instance, a dirge of a dream where a drowned lover appears to say goodbye. Sung by men who never saw their wives for years, it carried a weight that silence couldn't hold. Some sang softly into the wind as they worked, hoping maybe the sound might drift home. Even tattoos told stories of longing. An anchor meant stability, a swallow meant safe return, a heart pierced by arrow well, that one was universal. The ink bled, faded, stretched with time, but each mark said, "I've lived, I've felt." And in a world that punished feeling, that ink became rebellion, disguised as art. You picture one sailor now, sitting cross-legged under dim lantern light, carving a small figure of a woman in a long dress. His hands are rough, his eyes half closed, the ship rocking gently. He doesn't need her to be perfect. He just needs her to exist. Somewhere in that tiny figure he's hidden a secret. Maybe her name, maybe his. It's not about possession. It's about remembrance. When storms came, these objects became talismans. A sailor might kiss the token before climbing the rigging, tuck it into his shirt before battle, or whisper a name before sleep. Others left offerings to the sea, a coin tossed overboard, a slice of biscuit saved from rations. Tiny gestures, half superstition, half love, led her to an uncaring ocean. Historians often call such habits sentimental, as if tenderness were weakness. But on a ship ruled by hierarchy and silence, tenderness was courage. To care for anything in that world, to write, to carve, to remember, was an act of defiance against the cold. Sometimes they even built rituals around absence. On nights when homesickness hit hardest, a group of sailors might gather quietly and tell stories of their sweethearts, real or imagined. They'd laugh, embellish, tease each other mercilessly. But behind the bravado, you could hear the ache. One would joke about a wife who'd surely remarried by now. Another would swear his girl waited faithfully, though he hadn't written in 2 years. Hope, even false, was a kind of nourishment. And then when lights dimmed and hammocks swayed, the ship fell into that peculiar hush that only happens at sea, where every creak feels like memory shifting its weight. You can almost feel the warmth of those tokens, the way rough fingers touch them in the dark, as if touching home itself. For all its brutality, the Age of Sail was built on those small mercies, bits of wood, bits of hope hearts that refused to harden completely. Maybe that's what made survival possible. The sea could take your body, your sanity, even your name. But as long as you had one object, one memory, one connection, it hadn't taken everything. And if you lean close to the waves tonight, you might still hear them whispering those names the sailors refused to forget. The ocean doesn't speak English, but it remembers devotion in every tongue. If the ocean ever taught one lesson, it was this: you can strip a man of comfort, warmth, and even hope, but you can't strip him of desire. Desire wasn't just lust on those endless voyages, it was proof of being alive. It lived in every gesture, every song hummed against the wind, every secret carving hidden beneath the bunk. Sailors learned to live beside it the way they lived beside danger, never naming it but never escaping it either. The struggle against the body became the rhythm of survival itself. The ship, that floating empire of rules and wood, tried to turn men into machines. Orders barked, bells tolled, bodies moved. Yet even amid the mechanical grind, something human always leaked through: a joke, a sigh, a laugh that lasted too long. You can discipline muscles, but not longing. And longing, in its quiet way, held the crew together as much as ropes and nails. When storms came, that same energy became courage. Men hauled ropes with bleeding hands, cursing the sea, but also daring it to do worse. The same fire that made them reckless on shore made them fearless in battle. Maybe that's the paradox of life at sea. The instincts you were ordered to suppress were the ones that kept you alive. Desire showed up in strange disguises, in the way men polished brass until it gleamed like sunlight, as if beauty itself were resistance, in the way they risked punishment just to sing, to laugh, to remember a world that still held warmth. Some captains hated it, calling it weakness. Others understood without small joys a crew lost its soul long before the ship lost its course. The deeper you look, the clearer it becomes. Every ritual, from the daily rum ration to the carved keepsake, was a negotiation with absence. The men weren't saints or sinners. They were simply human beings trapped between duty and desire, doing what they could to stay human. The ocean, indifferent and endless, didn't care how they managed it. It only asked that they endure. In that endurance lay something profound. The age of sail wasn't just about discovery or conquest. It was a long meditation on what happens when humanity is stripped down to bone and salt. You learn quickly that courage isn't loud and loneliness isn't weak. You learn that humor is a kind of prayer, and companionship, a glance, a song, a shared joke, is sometimes the only grace that survives. And though the Navy's ledgers list only names, ranks, and punishments, the real history floats between the lines. It lives in the laughter that echoed through the lower decks, in the songs carried by the wind, in the tiny acts of rebellion that kept men from becoming ghosts before they died. The sailors who endured the silence didn't just survive the sea. They redefined what it meant to be human inside it. By the time you reach the final port, the world feels heavier and smaller all at once. You step onto land, the ground strange beneath your feet, and realize the sea has changed you. You crave its motion, even as you hate its hunger. You've learned that survival isn't the absence of desire. It's learning to live beside it without letting it drown you. The world ashore won't understand. It never does. People will ask about storms, about battles, about the thrill of discovery. You'll nod, smile, tell them what they want to hear. But inside, you'll remember the nights when the sea was quiet, when laughter carried down the deck, when the only thing louder than the wind was the beating of your own heart, reminding you that you were still alive. And maybe that's why sailors kept going back, voyage after voyage. Not for glory, not for pay, not even for the horizon, but for that strange truth. The sea whispered to those who stayed long enough to listen, that desire, like the tide, never really leaves. It just changes shape, returning again and again, stubborn as the human spirit itself. So you breathe out, feel the salt settle on your lips, and let the ship fade into memory. The waves still move the world, still turns, and somewhere out there, under stars that look just the same, another crew is learning the same lesson you did, that even in the loneliest corners of the world, humanity always finds a way to reach for warmth. You've seen what sailors endured in silence, the hunger, the loneliness, the strange ways they stayed human at sea. But what about the ordinary hours that filled those endless voyages? The bells, the chores, the smell of salt and tar. Let's climb back aboard and live it for a day, in the life of sailors, in the age of sail. The first sound isn't the sea. It's the whistle. A sharp, shrill note cutting through dreams, yanking you back to reality before dawn. Your hammock sways like a pendulum, the boards above your head creaking, and you remember where you are, somewhere between continents, on a wooden world that never stops moving. You blink into the gray half-light. The air smells of tar, sweat, and salt. What sailors called the perfume of empire. Hammocks swing inches apart, and you hear men groaning awake, cursing softly, pulling on stiff clothes still damp from yesterday's sweat and spray. There's no such thing as morning privacy here. Even your first breath is shared. The boatswain's voice follows the whistle, gravelly and merciless. All hands to wash down the decks. That's how your day begins, every day without exception. You roll out of the hammock, bare feet, hitting cold planks, and immediately start moving because hesitation earns a rope's end across the back. The sea doesn't tolerate slow risers. Outside dawn barely exists. The horizon glows with a dull, wet silver, the kind of light that makes everything sky-water faces blur into one. You taste salt before you see it. The wind brings it straight to your tongue. Buckets clatter, ropes hiss, and the ship itself groans awake, as if reluctant to start another day. Washing the decks sounds simple until you live it. You're on your knees, scrubbing planks with sand and seawater, while the waves slap the hull beneath you. The work is endless, because the ocean never stops making things filthy. Every bird that lands, every drop of tar, every trace of yesterday's mess must vanish. Cleanliness aboard isn't about pride, it's about survival. A dirty deck breeds rot, and rot breeds death. You steal glances at the officers pacing above you. Boots polished, coats, dry eyes sharp. They don't scrub, they supervise. But you know better than to resent it too much. The Navy runs on rank the way the ship runs on wind. Without hierarchy, nothing floats. Still, as you drag the brush over the planks, you can't help thinking how the same sea that equalizes men in danger somehow keeps them divided the rest of the time. By the time the decks shine, your back aches and your fingers are raw, but the bosun's nod means breakfast. The word itself feels luxurious. You follow the smell, smoke, grease, and something vaguely edible down to the galley. If you're lucky, it's biscuit and salted pork. If not, it's just biscuit. Either way, the biscuit will probably fight back. They call it hard tack for a reason, so solid you could hammer nails with it. Sailors joke that if the rats won't eat it, it's safe for humans. There's no coffee unless you're an officer. The lower decks drink switchel, a mixture of vinegar water and sugar, sort of a liquid apology. You dunk the biscuit chew slowly and listen to the ship hum around you. The creak of masts, the slap of waves, the low murmur of men waking into routine. It's oddly comforting, like the heartbeat of a beast you've learned to trust. Every sailor's morning includes a check of gear and uniform. Clothes are mended by hand needles and twine instead of fashion. You patch tie knot fix. The ocean destroys fabric faster than any tailor can save it. You inspect ropes for fraying sails, for tears, barrels, for leaks. The ship demands attention the way a living creature does, and in a sense it is one wooden lungs, breathing wind-iron bones groaning under pressure. Once work resumes, you climb the rigging to inspect the sails. 50 feet above the deck, the world feels both vast and intimate. The ropes bite into your hands, the wind slaps your face, and every move matters. One slip, and you're gone lost to the waves, another nameless story. Sailors have a dark saying for it. The sea takes without return. You learn early to make peace with gravity. Below you, Others haul lines, scrub brass, or tend to the guns. It's a choreography older than memory, practiced so often it feels instinctive. Orders echo boots thud, and the ship tilts just enough to remind you who's really in charge. The ocean doesn't care about schedules, and yet, amid the routine, there's beauty. The morning light grows gold, the sails fill, and the ship begins to move with grace that belies the sweat holding it together. You pause at the rigging's top, catch a breath, and for a moment the sea is yours. Endless blue meeting endless sky. It's the kind of sight that makes the misery worth enduring. Someone below starts humming a tune, a slow, lilting shanty that spreads from mouth to mouth until the whole crew joins in. The words change every voyage, but the rhythm stays the same part, prayer part, protest part, lullaby. It keeps the hands moving, the spirit steady. After all, on a ship song is the closest thing to freedom you get before landfall. The bell rings again, signaling the next watch. Time aboard is measured not by hours, but by duty. There are no weekends, no vacations, just cycles of work-rest and the eternal horizon. You wipe sweat from your forehead, stretch your sore arms, and glance at the gulls circling above. They can leave whenever they wish. You can't. But maybe that's why you stay. The sea, for all its cruelty, makes every man feel small in a way that's strangely honest. The world ashore lies, but the ocean never does. The ship is fully awake now, creaking like an enormous wooden heart. Every plank, every rope, every hinge has its own voice, and together they hum the rhythm of survival. You grab your brush again because swabbing never truly ends. It's the sailor's version of breathing. Salt crusts the rails, tar drips from seams, and you're the one who keeps decay at bay. The ocean never sleeps, and neither does maintenance. This is the part of the day that breaks new recruits. They thought the sea meant freedom wind in the hair adventure in every direction. Instead, it means repetition, endless scrubbing, hauling, tying, tightening, and listening to men swear at knots. The deck gleams for about 3 hours before salt and soot reclaim it. Some sailors joke that the ship isn't floating. It's dissolving slowly, and you're just there to delay the inevitable. There's a kind of discipline in this monotony. You learn the art of doing the same motion 10,000 times without losing your mind. The older sailors move with lazy precision, the kind of grace that comes from resignation. Their faces are carved by wind and salt, their eyes half amused by the panic of newcomers. You watch them for cues, how they coil a rope, without thinking how they brace for a wave before it hits, how they seem to sense storms long before the sky darkens. Someone calls out, "Mind the line," and you duck just in time as a rope whips past your head. The sea is always waiting to punish carelessness. One loose knot can snap a man's wrist. One poorly tied rig can tear a sail the size of a house. There's no small mistake here, only mistakes that get bigger fast. The bosun's whistle cuts through again, a sound so shrill it could wake the dead. Orders fly, and everyone moves at once. The ship feels alive now, like muscle under command. You haul buckets, mop again, scrape rust from cannon hinges. The smell of metal and tar mixes with sweat until it's something you stop noticing, like background music. When you finally straighten up, the sun has climbed pale gold, spilling over the masts. This is the closest thing to beauty you'll see all day. A seagull swoops low, landing boldly on a railing. Someone tosses it a crumb of biscuit. "Better ration than us," another mutters, and laughter ripples across the deck. Humor is currency out here. You trade it for sanity. Sailors have jokes for everything, most of them terrible. If something hurts, it becomes a punchline within the hour. Work shifts into maintenance. You climb into awkward corners with tar brushes, patch ropes, check water barrels. The rhythm of labor dulls the mind in a way that's almost peaceful. It's a kind of meditation through exhaustion. Each sound, the scrape of brush, the groan of rigging, the slap of waves, blends into a lullaby for the damned. You glance toward the horizon. It's featureless, hypnotic. The line between sky and sea blurs until you forget which is which. That's when the dizziness starts, the strange floating that even landlocked dreams can't shake. Sailors call it sea mind. After enough weeks, you stop thinking in days and start thinking in watches, the next bell, the next meal, the next storm. The captain's shadow passes overhead. You straighten instinctively. He barely glances your way, but that's enough to send everyone back into perfect formation. Rank aboard a ship is religion. A captain's word is law, not metaphorically, literally. He decides punishment, rationing, even burial. There are no courts at sea. When he nods, the world continues. When he frowns, the air gets colder. Then there's the first mate, louder, meaner, and somehow more terrifying because he's human enough to be petty. He strides through the rows of sailors, checking ropes like he's checking consciences. Slack on that line, he barks. You want us to drift into Spain? You mumble an apology and pull tighter. Perfection is impossible, but effort is mandatory. Somewhere in the chaos, a small drama unfolds. A rookie loses his balance, hauling a barrel, and splashes knee-deep into the bilge water. The crew bursts into laughter, half relief, half cruelty. The first mate shouts, "Haul him out before he joins the fish." It's mockery with mercy attached. Everyone gets humiliated once. It's a rite of passage. By mid-morning, sweat glues your shirt to your back. The sun turns brutal, reflecting off water so bright it burns your eyes. You wrap a rag around your head like a makeshift crown, half protection, half rebellion. The wind dries the salt on your lips into something that tastes like punishment and memory. Then comes the smell of boiled beef wafting from the galley, a miracle. It's not delicious by any standard, but it's warm, and that's enough. You wipe your hands on your trousers, grateful for a moment when survival feels ordinary. The bosun yells that anyone who wants to eat should move fast, and suddenly the deck becomes a stampede. As you sit cross-legged on the planks, tin bowl in hand, you realize something strange. You've stopped noticing the ship's sway. The motion that once made you sick now feels like breathing. The ocean has claimed you without you even realizing it. You're not fighting it anymore. You're part of it. Someone near you hums a tune, low, rhythmic, familiar. You find yourself joining in without meaning to. The sound rises with the wind, half song, half sigh, blending into the endless horizon. You look around, and every man's face reflects the same thought: another day has begun. And somehow that's victory enough. By the time the bell rings, 8 strokes, the ship's heartbeat has settled into its daily rhythm, steady, relentless, impossible to ignore. You don't measure time by hours out here. You measure it by meals, commands, and the taste of rum. Breakfast, or whatever passes for it, comes like a reward after an early death. You line up with your messmates, tin bowls in hand, waiting for the cook's mate to ladle out portions of something that pretends to be food. The galley smells of boiled meat, wet wood, and smoke from the iron stove that never stops spitting sparks. The cook swears constantly, waving a ladle like a weapon, cursing both God and gravity as the ship sways under his feet. The rations are simple salted pork hardtack and pea soup so thick it could patch leaks. You dunk the biscuit into the soup just to soften it enough to chew. Everyone jokes that the weevils inside the biscuit are extra protein, and by now, no one even bothers picking them out. The officers eat better coffee, maybe some fruit, but you don't envy them much. Power at sea is just another kind of hunger. Then comes the most sacred moment of the day, the issuing of the rum. The ship's purser, a man with a permanent squint and an expression of deep suspicion, measures out the ration with priestly seriousness. Half a pint per man mixed with water to make it last longer. The sailors call it grog, and they drink it like it's holy water. The first sip burns like sin, then soothes like grace. You can feel your shoulders drop, your voice loosen, your humor return. Men start cracking jokes again, trading gossip, singing snatches of shanties. The rum doesn't just lift spirits, it knits the crew back together after a morning of grinding labor. You could almost call it social engineering by ethanol. Still, the bosun watches for anyone getting too merry. Drunkenness brings trouble fast, fights, accidents, or worse. The punishments are swift lashings, extra duty loss of ration. The trick is to drink just enough to remember you're human, but not enough to forget you're replaceable. You glance around as the crew eats faces half hidden under stubble eyes, red from wind laughter bubbling up between bites of misery. Some hum to themselves, others fall quiet, lost in thought. You wonder what they're thinking. Family land. The next storm. Or maybe just the miracle that the soup's still warm. It's hard not to compare this floating community to modern life. On land, you might grumble about your office or your commute. But here there's no escape, no privacy, no weekend. Every task, every meal, every argument happens within the same 120 feet of timber and tar. And yet, somehow it works. The ship moves forward, men live. The horizon keeps shifting. It's civilization in miniature, loud, filthy, and weirdly functional. After eating, there's a brief lull before work resumes. Some sailors stretch out on deck, soaking up sun like lazy cats. Others patch their clothes, sharpen knives, or mend nets. You see one man reading a Bible with missing pages, its margins filled with doodles and sea songs. Another writes a letter, his handwriting swaying with the ship's roll. He pauses, often staring at the horizon, as if the right words are hiding out there somewhere. The cook's mate bangs a pot to signal the end of the break, and you're back to chores. The routine never changes, and yet it feels different every day, because the sea never repeats itself. Some days it glitters like polished glass. Other days, it's gray and sullen, hissing under the wind. The weather decides everything, your mood, your appetite, your safety. When the sun hits its zenith, you start to feel the heat rising from the deck. Bare feet dance across the boards to avoid burns, and tar starts softening underfoot. You tie your shirt around your head, squinting against the glare. The smell of salt mixes with the faint sweetness of decaying seaweed stuck in the hull seams. The ocean gives and rots in the same breath. You pass the time by talking, or at least pretending to. One old sailor named Briggs tells a story about a ghost ship he swears he saw years ago, a vessel glowing green, crewed by skeletons who waved cheerfully before vanishing into fog. No one believes him, but no one interrupts either. Stories are currency here, and disbelief is bad manners. Every so often, the lookout calls down from the crow's nest, sail hose, and everyone looks up like schoolboys caught daydreaming. The officers squint through telescopes, gauging distance and color. Is it a merchant, a naval ship, or worse, pirates? Usually it's nothing, just another shadow on the water. But for a moment, hope stirs news trade, maybe even mail. Then the horizon swallows it again, and you go back to work. As the afternoon wears on, the wind shifts. Orders bark. Sails must be adjusted, lines tighten the great canvas wings of the ship, re-angled to chase the breeze. You haul with the others, muscles straining, ropes biting into your palms. Someone shouts a rhythm, heave-ho, and suddenly the deck becomes a chorus, every pull synchronized like heartbeat and breath. When it's done, you collapse against a barrel, sweat streaking your face, lungs aching, but alive. The ocean stretches in every direction, endless and uncaring, and yet you feel strangely calm. You glance at the men beside you, different faces, different tongues, one shared exhaustion. There's comfort in that. The bell rings again noon. Only a few hours until the next meal, another round of grog, and another endless horizon. You wipe your brow, grin faintly, and get back to work. Because out here, surviving the day isn't heroism, it's habit. The moment the wind shifts, the ship transforms from a prison into a living, screaming creature, and you're climbing straight into its mouth. The boatswain's whistle shrieks again this time, with urgency. Hands aloft, he roars, and suddenly everyone's moving. The calm deck turns into organized chaos. You drop whatever you're doing, grab the nearest line, and sprint to your post. The sails have to be adjusted before the gust builds into something worse. You start climbing the rat lines, the rope ladders that stretch up the masts, as in within seconds. Your hands are slick with salt and sweat. The ropes bite your palms, but you can't stop. 50 feet above the deck, the world tilts in slow motion. Below, the ocean swells like a living thing, its rhythm hypnotic and merciless. The rigging sways, the ship groans, and every step feels like an argument with gravity. The men above you shout to each other, voices snatched away by the wind. Ease that sheet, haul the halyard. The language of sails is half poetry, half survival manual. You don't really need to understand every word, you just need to move in rhythm to know that a moment's hesitation could send you tumbling into the sea. The higher you climb, the thinner the air feels. Your body moves on instinct, gripping ropes, finding balance where logic says none should exist. Then you reach the yardarm, the long horizontal beam, and crawl out along it, one leg hooked around the wood, your fingers fumbling with stiff canvas. It snaps and billows like a living beast, the sound of it like thunder in your ears. You grab hold of the sail's edge and wrestle it into place. Every gust feels personal, like the wind is trying to shake you loose. Somewhere below, a wave crashes against the hull, spraying mist that feels cold as knives. You glance down just once and regret it immediately. The deck looks miles away. Men reduced to ants, the ocean, an endless field of gray. You focus again, hands moving faster, tying, tightening, securing. When it's finally done, you crawl back toward the mast legs, shaking. You can feel the ship shifting beneath you, the sails catching wind like lungs filling with air. Then the magic happens. The ropes hum, the canvas snaps taut, and the ship surges forward with sudden grace. The same vessel that creaked and crawled a moment ago now moves like it's alive, slicing through waves with purpose. It's terrifying and beautiful, like watching a whale breach. You slide down the rigging arms, trembling boots thudding onto the deck. The boatswain gives a curt nod approval, which at sea feels better than a medal. Around you, the crew exhales as one. No one speaks, but the relief is palpable. The wind is steady again, the course set. As you catch your breath, you notice how everything smells sharper. The tar, the salt, even the sweat. It's as if the storm charged the air with electricity. You tilt your head back, letting the wind dry your face, and for a fleeting second you understand why people love this life. There's something intoxicating about dancing with danger and living to laugh about it. The officers pace, the quarterdeck boots, polished coats, immaculate despite the chaos. The captain stands at the rail, spyglass in hand, as composed as if he'd planned the entire thing. You know he didn't. No one plans the sea, but the illusion of control keeps the crew calm. The captain's silence is power. his anger a storm all its own. One of the younger sailors beside you grins, his teeth flashing white through the grime. "First time in a squall?" he asks. You nod. "You'll get used to it," he says, "if you don't fall first." It's hard to tell if he's joking. The rest of the afternoon becomes a blur of rope and command. You're hauling lines, adjusting sails, wiping sweat with sleeves that haven't been dry since Gibraltar. Every muscle burns, but there's no time to rest. You work because the ship demands it, and the ship demands because the sea doesn't forgive. Then, as quickly as it began, the wind softens. The waves flatten, the world exhales. The bosun calls for cleanup, and you start coiling ropes and securing equipment. Your hands are raw, your back aches, but you're still standing. That counts for something. Below deck, someone starts singing a low, steady tune. Others join in voices rough but harmonious. The song rolls through the ship like a tide filling the silence left by the storm. It's not joy exactly, but something close, a reminder that you're alive, and so is everyone else. You sit for a moment on a coil of rope, staring out at the horizon. The sun is setting bleeding red across the waves. The light catches the sails, turning them gold, and you realize how strange this life is. A constant swing between terror and tranquility. You think about people on land who live in houses that don't move, who worry about things like bills or boredom. They'd never understand what this feels like, the exhaustion that tastes like victory. When the bosun's voice finally cracks the peace again, calling for another shift, you stand without complaint. The storm may have passed, but the ship never rests. There's always another rope to tighten, another sail to patch, another reminder that the ocean doesn't care about comfort. But as you walk across the deck, the board steady beneath your boots, you realize something quietly profound. Neither do you. The wind has calmed, but the tension lingers like a ghost in the rigging. You can feel it in the way the men move quieter now. Careful, the adrenaline slowly wearing off. Out here, authority doesn't just give orders. It breathes down your neck, watches your hands, and sometimes decides your fate before breakfast. The captain's voice cuts through the air like a drawn blade. All hands aft. Within minutes, the crew lines up on deck, boots thudding back, straight faces blank. You know what's coming. It's inspection time, one of those rituals that reminds everyone who really owns their skin. The captain strides down the line, boots polished to a mirror coat crisp despite the humidity. He's not a cruel man, not exactly, but he's made of the same material as the ship, hard, old, and unlikely to change. His gaze moves from face to face, pausing on unshaved chins, torn shirts, or ropes coiled sloppily. His silence is worse than his voice. Behind him, the first lieutenant follows like a shadow, noting infractions on a clipboard. Every tick of the quill feels like a sentence. When he stops in front of you, your heart tightens. You've done nothing wrong, but that's never really mattered, has it? He inspects your hands, your uniform, your stance. You've been lazy with the rope work, he says flatly. You open your mouth to protest, but he's already moved on. The captain doesn't hear your side. The ocean doesn't either. Then comes punishment hour, the part every sailor dreads but pretends not to. The bosun's mate steps forward, holding the dreaded cat-o'-nine tails, a whip of knotted cords designed to remind the body who's in charge. A sailor guilty of theft, drunkenness, or insolence is brought forward, shirt torn open. The crew stands in silence as the lashes fall, each one cutting through flesh and pride alike. You watch without watching, because looking away is forbidden, and looking too long feels like complicity. Discipline aboard isn't about justice, it's about control. A single man's defiance can spread faster than disease, and fear is cheaper than loyalty. Still, even the officers know that too much cruelty breaks a crew. It's a balance, enough terror to maintain order, enough routine to keep it from mutiny. After punishment, the boatswain dismisses everyone, and the ship slowly exhales. The sound of hammering resumes, ropes tighten, and the illusion of normalcy returns. You see the punished sailor limp away, back straight face expressionless. No one speaks to him, not because they don't care, but because sympathy is dangerous. The sea eats weakness as readily as flesh. Yet behind that harshness lies another truth: the ship runs because of discipline. Without it, chaos wins. Every man depends on the other. Every mistake risks hundreds of lives. When storms rise or cannon fire erupts, you need to know that the man beside you obeys orders without hesitation. Fear, it seems, is as essential as rope. Still, some captains take it too far. The Navy has its legends, the tyrants who broke men faster than they broke waves. One such name still echoes through mess decks: Captain Bligh of the HMS Bounty. His strictness, his rations, his lashings, too many, too often drove his men to the edge. You know what happened next: mutiny. Fletcher Christian, once his trusted officer, took the ship set, Bligh adrift, and disappeared into the Pacific. Every sailor knows that story, whispered like a prayer and a warning. Bligh's ghost sails every ship, the old hands say, meaning any captain can go too far and any crew can break. You keep that thought tucked behind your tongue, because speaking it aloud might get you flogged or worse, hanged from the yardarm, as an example. Punishment ends, but authority never sleeps. Even leisure is regulated. You can't sing without permission, can't light a candle after dark without risk of fire, can't even sneeze during inspection unless you want to scrub the bilge for it. Freedom at sea is an illusion painted in salt and sweat. And yet, sailors find ways to mock their masters without words. They invent nicknames for officers: Old Dead-Eye Lord Leech, the Parson of Pain, and whisper them in laughter below deck. The officers know, of course, but as long as the work gets done, they let it slide. The ship thrives on this fragile equilibrium: tyranny above, humor below. The captain's power is absolute, but his isolation is too. You can see it in his face when he stands alone on the quarterdeck, staring at the horizon like it owes him an apology. Even he can't fight the sea. He can only pretend to. The ship might obey him, but the ocean doesn't listen. Afternoon brings another inspection, this time of equipment. The cannons gleam their brass, polished daily by hands that will never fire them in anger. You run your rag over the cold metal, watching your reflection ripple in its curve. Around you, the crew moves silently, the memory of morning's punishment still thick in the air. The rhythm of obedience returns. As dusk approaches, the light turns soft and forgiving. You watch the captain again now, just a silhouette against the sunset. For a moment, he doesn't look like a tyrant at all. Just a man trapped on between his own pride and the sea's indifference. You wonder if that's what power always feels like: loneliness disguised as command. The bell rings once more. Another watch begins, another chance to earn your keep and avoid the whip. You rise, your hands aching but steady. The ocean stretches infinite and calm, hiding its cruelty beneath beauty. Somewhere in that vastness, mutinies and punishments both seem equally small. And as night creeps over the sails, you realize that aboard this ship order isn't just survival, it's theater. Everyone plays their part, hoping the sea doesn't call for an encore. The sun sinks, and with it the mood shifts. The deck cools, shadows stretch long, and the world above feels almost peaceful. But below deck, below that thin layer of order, the real life of the ship begins to stir. The sea may belong to the captain, but the nights below deck belong to the crew. You climb down the ladder into darkness that smells of smoke sweat and stale bread. The lower deck is a different universe, cramped hot and loud, full of bodies that never truly rest. Hammocks sway like cocoons in the half-light, the air thick with the sound of snoring. Coughing murmured jokes, and the occasional argument muffled before it grows too bold. There's no privacy here, only the illusion of it. You hang your hammock between two beams and hope no one swings into you in their sleep. The ceiling is so low that even sitting upright risks cracking your skull. The boards drip with condensation, and somewhere in the corner, rats scurry over biscuit crumbs like they've paid rent. This is the sailor's refuge, their tavern, their prison. By unwritten law, officers rarely come down here unless discipline demands it. So, for a few hours each day, the crew breathes without supervision. You can feel the shift immediately. Laughter loosens, curses bloom freely, and stories start rolling like waves. A circle forms near a lantern. Cards slap against a crate, dice clatter, coins clink. Gambling is officially forbidden, but so is half the fun aboard. You join them not to win. No one ever really wins, but to be part of the noise, the ritual. The old hands tell tales of ports that sound too wild to be true. Silver streets in Havana, women with eyes like firelight in Manila mountains of rum barrels somewhere in the Caribbean. Everyone knows they're exaggerating, but it doesn't matter. Imagination is the only luxury the sea allows. Nearby, someone plays a tune on a battered fiddle, 3 strings left, bow wrapped with twine. It's off-key, but beautiful in its persistence. The melody floats between hammocks, carrying fragments of home. For some, it's Ireland. For others, Africa, Portugal, or the Americas. The notes mix until they sound like nowhere and everywhere at once. A sailor named Gorman sits across from you, carving a small figurine from a scrap of driftwood. For luck, he says, without looking up. You watch the shavings fall, each stroke careful, reverent. He's making a tiny ship, sails, masts, even little ropes etched into the grain. It'll hang beside his hammock until the day the sea takes him. Every man down here has something like that. A charm, a token, a quiet rebellion against being swallowed whole. You share a bit of grog, the diluted rum that's both medicine and morale. It burns going down, but warms the chest. Conversation thickens. The talk shifts from ports to philosophy. You think the sea remembers us? One man asks suddenly. Aye, another replies. But she doesn't care. Laughter follows soft and weary. Not all nights are this easy. Sometimes tempers flare. Space is tight, patience tighter. 2 men argue over cards, a shove, a curse, and before you know it, fists are flying. The fight is short. It has to be. Others pull them apart before the noise reaches the officers. The bosun would flog them both if he knew. Down here, justice is quick and private. A slap, an apology, a shared drink. Grievances dissolve as fast as they form. Then there are the silences, those long, heavy stretches when everyone's too tired even to talk. You lie in your hammock, listening to the wood creak and the waves slap against the hull. The smell of salt mixes with sweat and the faint sweetness of tar. You think about land, about the faces you've almost forgotten, about how the sea erases memory until only the strongest pieces remain. A candle flickers near the galley, where a few men sit writing letters by its light. They'll never know if those words make it home. The ocean swallows mailbags as easily as men. But still they write. Hope, like mold, thrives in damp places. Sleep doesn't come easily. The ship groans with every wave, and the air feels too alive with movement. Somewhere above, the watch bell rings faint but clear. You imagine the deckhands under the stars, whined, biting their faces, eyes scanning the dark horizon. The sea looks calm from here, but you know how quickly that can change. A rat scampers across your foot, and you swat at it half-heartedly. It's not even worth the effort. You've made peace with the pests. They're sailors, too, in their own way. The man in the hammock beside you hums something low and mournful. It's not a shanty, it's too quiet for that. It's a song for himself, maybe for someone he lost. The tune sinks into the boards the same way stories do, becoming part of the ship. As you close your eyes, you realize the strangest thing. Despite the filth, the smell, the endless noise, there's comfort here. The lower deck is chaos, but it's familiar chaos. It's the one place aboard where you can laugh without rank curse, without fear exist, without permission. The ship rocks you like a cradle and a coffin at once. You feel yourself drifting, not quite asleep, not quite awake, the hum of the sea merging with the breath of 200 men. And somewhere in the dark, a voice mutters a prayer, not to God, but to the ship itself. Because down here, she's the only one listening. When the storm hits, there's no time for prayer, only instinct, and the knowledge that the sea doesn't bargain. You wake to shouting. The air itself feels wrong, thick electric vibrating with tension. Boots pound the deck overhead, the bosun's whistle shrieks, and before you can even rub your eyes, a wave crashes against the hull hard enough to make the timbers groan. Men scramble from hammocks, half-dressed, grabbing whatever they can before the next blow. You're already soaked by the time you reach the ladder. Above deck, the world has gone mad. Wind howls like a living creature, ripping words out of mouths. Rain lashes sideways, blinding and cold, turning the deck into a river of salt. You can't tell where the sea ends and the sky begins. Both are the same bruised gray. The ship tilts violently, wood screaming under strain. The masts sway like thin trees in a gale, each movement a gamble with gravity. Reef the topsails, someone bellows. You grab the rigging before the next roll throws you off balance and start climbing. Every rung is slick, every rope alive with motion. Salt water hits your face so hard it stings. The ship pitches, and for one sickening moment, your feet leave the rigging entirely. You hang by your hands, lungs burning, praying the rope holds. Men shout below, voices swallowed by the storm. A sail tears with a sound like thunder, flapping wildly until someone cuts it loose. It vanishes into the darkness, devoured by the sea. The captain stands near the wheel, shouting orders. No one can fully hear his coat plastered to his back. The helmsman fights the tiller like it's a beast trying to break free. Lightning flashes, illuminating faces, streaked with rain and terror. For a heartbeat, the ocean turns white, endless, and then it's gone again. The smell of wet hemp and fear fills your nose. The deck tilts, and a barrel breaks loose, rolling toward the rail. You lunge and grab it with another sailor, both of you, cursing through gritted teeth as the ship lurches. The sea roars over the gunwales, flooding the deck knee-deep. Every step feels like dragging through quicksand. You can't even tell if it's day or night anymore, just noise and motion and cold. Then someone screams, a man's gone overboard. You see a flash of his hand, a pale blur swallowed by the next wave. There's no time to react. No one even tries to throw a line. The sea takes what it wants. The captain doesn't look back. Neither do you. The rule is simple: save the ship, or everyone dies. For hours, maybe minutes, maybe eternity, you climb tie, pull, bail. Your fingers bleed, your voice is gone, and your thoughts shrink to pure survival. The wind roars like a god with a grudge, and the ocean answers back in rage. Somewhere deep in the ship, you hear the cannons shifting in their mounts, iron scraping wood, a sound every sailor dreads. If they break free, they'll smash through the hull like wrecking balls. Secure the guns, the order comes. You and a handful of men dive below water pouring down the stairs. The hold is chaos barrels, floating ropes tangled the floor slick with seawater and oil. You slam wedges into place, tie knots until your hands ache, praying everyone holds. It's like trying to tame thunder with thread. When you finally crawl back to the main deck, the storm has changed character. The wind no longer screams, it growls. The rain eases to sheets instead of spears. The waves still tower, but the rhythm is slower, heavier, almost tired. You can feel the ship start to breathe again, still shuddering, still bleeding, but alive. Men collapse where they stand, faces pale and eyes hollow. The bosun moves among them, checking for the living and the lost. 2 are missing. No one speaks their names. The dead at sea get no graves, no stones, only a line in the logbook and a splash that swallows the sound. Lightning flickers one last time, distant now. The captain's voice, hoarse but steady, cuts through the rain. Well done, lads. It's the closest thing to affection you'll ever hear from him. The words settle like warmth against the cold. You look around and realize everyone's still here, breathing, moving, existing. That's victory enough. When dawn finally comes, the sky looks fragile, thin light over a bruised horizon. The sea is calm again, as if nothing happened. The deck is littered with wreckage, torn rope, shattered barrels, and the twisted remnants of a sail. The smell of salt and survival clings to everything. The crew starts to clean in silence. The work feels holy somehow, like patching the body of a wounded friend. You tie knots, scrub planks, and listen to the soft rhythm of waves tapping the hull. No one mentions the lost men, but everyone's eyes linger on the empty spaces they left behind. After storms like this, laughter takes time to return. For now, there's only exhaustion, the deep, heavy kind that reaches the bones. You sit on the rail, watching sunlight sparkle off calm water, and think about how strange the sea is, violent one moment, gentle the next, and utterly indifferent either way. You've survived, but you can't shake the feeling that it was luck more than skill. The ocean gives no explanations. It just moves on as it always has, and as you lean back, eyes half closed, the same thought passes through every sailor's mind. Someday it won't spare you, but not today. By the time the storm's memory fades, the ship smells of drying wood and cooked meat again. Salt still clings to your clothes, but the sea has turned kind blue and shimmering, as if apologizing for its tantrum. Land is a mirage for months. And then one morning, it's suddenly real, and nothing on earth smells as wild or as dangerous as shore leave. The lookout's cry cuts through the haze, land ho. The words ripple through the crew like lightning. Every man who can moves toward the rail, squinting into the sun, until yes, there it is. A faint smudge of green and brown breaking the horizon. The promise of dry ground, fresh food, and anything that isn't salted or boiled. It's an island, one of hundreds scattered across the trade winds, maybe the Caribbean, maybe the East Indies. You don't even care which. To sailors' land means a few blessed days when the ship stops moving, and the rules relax just enough to let you breathe. As the anchor drops, the sound reverberates through your bones. The sails come down, the ship sighs, and the sea calms around it like a tamed beast. The air smells different now. Spices earth smoke from unseen fires. For the first time in months, you hear birds that aren't gulls. The sound feels almost unreal. Permission to go ashore comes in waves. Officers first, then crew in shifts. You wait your turn, practically vibrating with impatience. When it's finally time, you climb down into the longboat, hands shaking with excitement. The oars dip, water glitters, and the island grows larger with every pull. Palm trees sway bright and impossible, and you can already hear laughter drifting from the docks. Your boots hit sand. It's warm, soft, and utterly still. The earth doesn't move beneath you, a feeling so strange it almost makes you dizzy. The world smells like fruit and sweat and life. You take a deep breath, and it's like remembering what being human feels like. Then come the temptations. Shore leave is freedom, and freedom turns men feral. Taverns line the docks like traps, barrels of rum stacked outside music. Blaring painted signs promising good company and warm beds. You and your shipmates tumble inside like starving wolves, laughter echoing off the wooden walls. Inside, it's chaos wrapped in celebration. Sailors from half the world mingle Dutch, Portuguese, British, Spanish, African, Filipino. The air thickens with tobacco smoke and the smell of roasted meat. Rum flows like a river, cheap and warm, served in tin cups that clatter against the table. Someone starts singing off-key and perfect. You join the chorus, shouting the words even when you don't know them. For the first time in forever, you're not following orders. You're just a voice in the noise, a face in the crowd, another soul pretending the sea isn't waiting just beyond the shore. But freedom has a timer. You see it in the way the locals watch the sailors, half amusement, half wariness. Money vanishes fast. Fights start faster. A shove here, a spilled drink there, and suddenly a brawl erupts. Chairs break, bottles fly, and laughter turns to shouts. It's all part of the ritual. By morning, bruises and hangovers replace courage. Outside, the market bustles. Merchants sell everything from coconuts to coral charms said to ward off storms. You buy a trinket without knowing why, maybe as proof you existed somewhere other than the ship. Children run barefoot between the stalls, shouting words you don't understand. You toss one an old coin, and he grins wide enough to eclipse the sun. Further inland, some sailors wander into trouble of another kind. The locals, generous with smiles but sharp with memory, know the sea brings both gold and ruin. The wise men warn of curses, the elders trade stories about ships that never left. You listen, half believing. After all, if the ocean has a soul, then surely it remembers. At dusk, the captain's whistle calls everyone back. You drag yourself to the dock, drunk on sunlight, salt, and rum. The ship waits, her black hull cutting against the orange sky. Climbing back aboard feels wrong somehow, like stepping into a dream after waking. The boards creak, the ropes sway, and you realize you've missed her more than you thought. The next morning, hangovers hum through the crew like an invisible fog. The bosun's voice booms, half angry, half amused. Back to work, lads. The sea's not waiting. You groan, scrub the deck coil ropes, and pretend your head isn't splitting. Shore leave is over, and the price for joy is always labor. Still, the ship feels different now. There's laughter again, faint but real. Men trade stories about their adventures ashore. Most of them lies, all of them entertaining. The air hums with new life. Even the captain seems almost human. His usual frown softened by the scent of tobacco and the faint memory of peace. By nightfall, the sails rise again, white ghosts against the sky. The island fades into shadow, and the endless horizon returns. You watch it vanish until the last glimmer of light is gone, then turn back to your post. The sea has reclaimed you, same as always. But this time, you carry a little of the island with you, a smell, a sound, a heartbeat that isn't made of waves. It's enough to make the next few weeks bearable. Enough to remind you that even sailors drifting between worlds still belong somewhere, even if it's only for a night. The calm doesn't last. It never does. Every sailor knows that the sea can break your bones, but it's the sickness that breaks your spirit. It starts small, just a cough in the dark. A man sweating through his hammock, muttering that it's nothing. Then another. By dawn, the lower deck smells of sickness, sour, heavy, unmistakable. The surgeon's mate is called carrying a lantern and a face already resigned. He knows what's coming. Everyone does. The ship's surgeon isn't a doctor in the modern sense. He's more like a cross between a butcher and a priest. His tools are simple saw knife, needle, rum, and his knowledge half superstition, half experience. He keeps his surgery in a cramped corner of the orlop deck where the light is bad and the air worse. The smell of salt and blood never quite leaves. You watch as a man with a festering leg is brought in. The surgeon unwraps the bandage, and the wound looks like something alive, pulsing and gray. Infection, they call it, what you'd call death in slow motion. The surgeon sighs, wipes his blade, and begins to work. There's no anesthesia, only a bottle of rum and something to bite down on. The screams that follow cut through every layer of wood. You close your eyes, but you can't block the sound. When it's over, the leg's gone. The man breathes shallowly, pale as parchment. The surgeon wipes his hands, mutters something about God's mercy, and moves on. You wonder if mercy has anything to do with it. Disease spreads fast in close quarters. Scurvy, an old hated word, returns like a ghost. Gums blacken teeth, loosen wounds refuse to heal. You see men too weak to climb, too tired to talk. The cause is simple: no fresh fruit, no vegetables, just salt meat and biscuit for months. The cure is simpler still: lemons, limes, oranges, but you're weeks from any port. So the sickness eats quietly, one body at a time. There's another disease too less visible, but just as deadly. The sea's version of despair. The endless horizon, the unbroken routine, the knowledge that no one on land even knows your name. It wears a man down until he stops being one. You see it in blank stares, slow movements the way laughter fades from the mess. They call it melancholia. Today you might call it depression. Back then it was just weakness. The surgeon's chest holds more than saws. Inside are jars of powders, bottles of laudanum, scraps of herbs that promise comfort. Some work, most don't. The crew takes what they're given and thanks him anyway. Hope is its own medicine out here. One night you help carry a body up to the main deck. The stars are sharp, the wind gentle. The chaplain says a few words, short ones, because the sea doesn't wait. Then the body wrapped in canvas and weighted with shot slides from the plank into darkness. The splash is quiet. The ship moves on. It always does. The next morning, the routine resumes, as if nothing happened. The same whistles, the same commands, the same chores. Death is as common as sunrise. You find it strange how quickly grief becomes background noise. Maybe it has to. On land, people mourn for months. At sea, you get a minute, then the next order. Still small acts of kindness persist. A crust of biscuit shared. A man humming a lullaby for someone who'll never hear it. A scrap of cloth used to wipe sweat from another's brow. You realize the sea hasn't taken everything from these men. It's just stripped away the lies. What's left, good or bad, is real. The captain visits the sickbay once, briefly. He stands there silent, looking at the rows of hammocks where men wheeze and cough. Then he leaves without a word. Leadership at sea is a lonely kind of cruelty. By now the surgeon himself looks half dead. Eyes hollow, hands trembling. He spends hours cleaning tools, sharpening blades that never stay sharp long. You wonder what keeps him going. Maybe duty, maybe habit. Maybe the same thing that keeps you swabbing decks and tying ropes, the knowledge that stopping means sinking. Outside, the weather turns strangely warm. The sea glows green at night, phosphorescent waves rolling like liquid fire. It's beautiful in the eerie way all dangerous things are. The men lean on the rail too tired to talk, just watching the glow. The air feels heavy, thick with salt and silence. For a few hours, no one coughs, no one works. The ocean, fickle as ever, grants a brief truce. Then the bell rings and life resumes. More decks to clean, more ropes to coil, more reminders that the ship never stops. You scrape barnacles from the hull, haul buckets, mend sails. The routine saves you, it always does. Later that night, as you lie awake in your hammock, you think about the surgeon's chest, the saws, the bottles, the prayers whispered between cuts. You realize it's not just medicine, it's hope packed in wood and brass, fragile, flawed, and somehow still working. And you start to suspect that's all any sailor really is, a small tired vessel trying to stay afloat in an endless sea. The sea at night is the loneliest thing in the world, beautiful enough to forgive, vast enough to forget. It's the middle watch now, the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, when the ship feels like it's holding its breath. The storm's fury, the fevered chaos, the laughter of shore leave, all of it feels far away, dissolved into the hush of an ocean asleep. You're on deck, coat pulled tight, eyes adjusting to a sky so full of stars it looks alive. The sea glimmers faintly under them, black glass trembling with light. You can hear every small sound, the creak of ropes, the slow breathing of men asleep below, the faint knock of waves against the hull. Somewhere forward, a sailor hums under his breath, too soft to make out the tune. The ship for once feels human again. You lean on the rail, staring at the horizon that doesn't exist. The air smells cold and metallic, and the salt stings your lips. Every few seconds, a gust of wind rattles through the rigging, and the sails murmur like ghosts turning over in their sleep. You could almost believe the ship itself dreams. Your job on night watch is simple. Stay awake, stay alert, stay unseen by trouble. You pace the deck slowly, boots whispering against the planks. The lantern light flickers across your hands, painting them gold and shadow. There's something soothing about it, this solitude. For the first time all day, no one's shouting. The ship just breathes. You think about home, or whatever version of it you still remember. Maybe a field, a street, a face. But the memories feel fogged, slippery. Years at sea blur time until everything that isn't water feels imaginary. You realize that most of the men aboard can't even picture their hometowns anymore. They remember the smell of tar better than grass. Far above, the lookout shifts in the crow's nest, silhouetted against the stars. You envy him a little. From up there, it must feel like standing between worlds, the heavens above, the ocean below, both endless, both unknowable. You wonder if anyone ever gets used to that feeling of being small. Behind you, the helmsman murmurs to himself, hands steady on the wheel. The compass glows faintly, its needle twitching with purpose. You catch yourself thinking how strange it is that such a tiny piece of metal can decide the fate of hundreds. The ship follows its fragile truth, and you follow the ship's. That's the deal. A shooting star cuts across the sky, vanishing before you can even wish on it. Maybe that's fitting. Wishes don't survive long out here. They sink faster than anchors. Still, you can't help whispering one to live, to see land again, to sleep on ground that doesn't move, to taste fresh fruit that isn't pickled in salt. Small things. Precious because they're possible. The bells change. Another watch begins. The men replacing you climb up half asleep, yawning into the night. You nod in passing, a quiet exchange that means more than words. Still alive, still here. You descend to the lower deck, where hammocks sway gently like rows of breathing hearts. The smell of sweat, tar, and old wood greets you like an old friend. You crawl into your hammock, pulling the blanket over your shoulders. The wood above creaks softly, a lullaby you've heard 1,000 times. Someone nearby snores. Someone else mutters in a dream. The ship feels like a cradle again, rocking with that slow, steady rhythm that could almost be love. As you drift towards sleep, you think of the sea not as an enemy or a god, but as a teacher. It's taught you humility, endurance, and the quiet art of belonging nowhere. It's taken friends, given scars, and shown you sunsets so bright they hurt to look at. The sea doesn't explain itself, it just is. And somehow so are you. You imagine what the ship looks like from afar, a single flicker of lantern light moving across the blackness, smaller than a thought. And yet, inside that speck, there are 200 hearts, all beating in time, with the same invisible rhythm. It's absurd and beautiful. The bell rings once more above deck, marking the half hour. The sound is soft, distant, like time itself sighing. You close your eyes and let it wash over you. The motion of the ship blurs with your breath. The sound of the sea becomes your pulse, and the world fades into that slow, steady nothing that feels like peace. Tomorrow will bring more wind, more work, more endless blue. But for now, it's enough to simply float. To exist between sky and sea, between exhaustion and wonder, between dreams and duty. And as the ship drifts through the starlit dark, you sleep another sailor claimed for one more night by the infinite forgiving ocean. So now as the lanterns fade and the ocean hushes itself to a whisper, let your mind drift with the tide. Feel the wooden deck beneath you, the slow rhythm of the waves, the lull of a world that never stops moving. The sailors are sleeping now, swaying gently in their hammocks, their dreams tied to the stars above. The sea hums a soft tune, patient and eternal. Let it carry you too away from worry, away from noise, into that quiet place where the waves breathe for you. The night is calm, and you are safe to sleep.